In a couple of weeks' time, the Labour Party are going to take a motion to the Dáil to call for more investment in football infrastructure, greater focus on gender equality and the introduction of a football programme at transition year. And to discuss that, I'm delighted to say we're joined in studio by TD, leader of the Labour Party, Ivana Bacik. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Adrian. Thank you for inviting me on. My first time on a sports programme, so I'm somewhat apprehensive. Yeah, it is a bucket list thing, and it's a delight to be in this studio. You have it made beautifully homely. It's not like a radio studio at all.
Good.
That's
definitely the objective. Set out your stall.
Well, in the Labour Party, we're very serious about football, about the need to invest in football. My colleague Ivana Bacik has really championed this issue for many, many years, because we all know that football is the Cinderella of Irish sport, that there's been significant underinvestment. If you compare football to GAA or to rugby, significant underinvestment, and yet it's the biggest participation sport in Ireland. You know, when you look at the numbers now playing, and the numbers in particular of young girls and women playing, and that's my particular passion, is to see greater gender equality in sport. So that's really why we in Labour have come together to put forward in the Dáil on the 12th of July a motion calling on the government to ensure, you know, significantly ramped up investment in football. And I suppose we're doing this on the back of the FAI strategic plan that they've just recently announced, where they're looking for a really substantial investment from government, over 800 million over 15 years. And they've set out a really clear pathway to reach, I suppose, greatly enhanced infrastructure, both at grassroots level and at League of Ireland level, and then of course also at international level, where they're really pushing forward. So we're doing it on the back of that, but also because, of course, the Irish women's team are going to be playing in the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. They've absolutely captured the hearts of the nation. I mean, I was so proud and so honoured to have witnessed them play recently in Tala in one of the qualifiers, Ireland-Finland, in September, but to see the way that the games, both here and abroad, have captured imagination, to see my daughters who've been playing for years, you know, to see how they and their cohort and younger girls again are just so enthused and motivated by the women's team. So I think now is the time for us really to call on government to change the dynamic in sports funding, to ensure that football gets the recognition it deserves. Not to take away from other sports, I would hasten to add now, Adrian, but because we recognise the importance of sport investment generally. But the reality is Ireland has underinvested in sport overall compared to other European countries, and football in particular is the Cinderella, the poor cousin, and we do need to enhance the investment in football because it lifts the spirit of a nation. It's huge, but it's also important for equality and inclusion, not just for women, to bring forward more women and girls at a time when, you know, only about a third of clubs have women's toilets. I mean, it's that basic. We heard from Lisa Fallon at a briefing we did this week in the Dáil that, you know, girls playing soccer, and I know it myself, seeing, you know, having been a parent and a coach with FAI, that, you know, trying to change on a field, trying to change into your sports jersey on a field with no changing facilities. That's the reality of grassroots football in Ireland. So we need to change that. So we're calling on government to step up the investment for football.
Can I ask just about that specifically? Because there's a lot of what you say there that makes total sense, that's inarguable, around the facilities piece for grassroots specifically. Where it starts to get more complicated for me is around so like you say, it was obviously an FAI ask for the 863 million, I think the number was, to include investment, and you mentioned it there around the League of Ireland, for example. And I know Labour talk a little bit about the investment in a football industry and the bringing Champions League football to Ireland. First bit I totally get around grassroots, encouraging kids to get involved, encouraging girls to get involved. What's the angle for Labour around the League of Ireland piece specifically?
Well, I think the reality is that what motivates children, boys and girls, to get involved in any sport is to see it on the screen, to see it being taught, to hear it being talked about, to have it within the culture. Like I say, the success of the women's team has not only brought more young girls in. Our academy in Larkview FC, where my daughters have played, you know, the academy is now growing massively. We're seeing 5, 6, 7-year-old girls coming into play because they're hearing their parents talk about women playing. They're seeing women playing on the TV. When one of my girls, you know, was was 5 or 6, I remember her watching a game with me on TV, one of the, the men's team game, and saying to me, where are the women playing on the screen? So I think you have to invest at all levels. There's a synergy between them. You can't grow a grassroots unless people are seeing success or at least investment in the international and of course League of Ireland. And again, there's been significant underinvestment there. I mean, if you look at the League of Ireland stadiums around the country, you can see that. You see in Richmond Park and in Inchicore, where we've gone numerous times. We've only got the Aviva or Lansdowne, as I prefer to call it, in my own constituency, and we've got Tala and we've got Turner's Cross. But they're the only 3 stadiums out of 40 in Ireland that play football and that have in the top 40. So the underinvestment, you can't bring forward grassroots. Sorry, Adrian, you can't bring forward the grassroots, I think, without also investing or being seen to value football at other levels. Can I ask you about
that specifically? Because I think that it's inarguable that outside of some of the grounds that you've mentioned, some of the League of Ireland grounds need big time investment. I would understand why the FAI might be looking for money for that. I think one of the things we saw post London 2012, for example, was this promise of legacy, that if we build this thing and we make this investment, that there will be this great legacy. I think that we should stop talking about that as a thing, to be absolutely honest, because I don't believe for a second that I think that people will be inspired, for example, by the Ireland team being at Australia, New Zealand. But I think there are much more important things that can happen, that need to happen, that I think that the likes of Labour and government parties need to pay more attention to, and certainly have more investment around in relation to the grassroots piece. But on the League of Ireland grounds bit specifically, I don't think it's true to say that if we make investment in League of Ireland clubs and facilities that it's suddenly going to result in a big groundswell of they need attention. So I don't want to be seen as making a point that they shouldn't be invested in, but I think they shouldn't be conflated with a point about trying to grow grassroots football or encourage girls to get involved.
Well, I agree with you, of course. It's not a silver bullet or anything like that. And when you have such a basic issue as girls' toilets not being available in 2/3 of clubhouses, well, that's absolutely right. That's the priority to tackle, is getting the grassroots investment in place. But I do think the FAI are right in their strategic plan to identify it as a 3-pronged approach, that you do also have to invest along with grassroots in League of Ireland and at international level, bringing up the training standards and so on, because we've exported all our best players for so long, and again, it just, I think, is symptomatic of a lack of valuing of the game and a lack of valuing of the players. It's only 7 years since the women had to strike to get pay parity at the international team. That's the sort of undervaluing that I think diminishes support for a game and has a knock-on effect on the numbers coming into it, even at that very young age. And I do think we're going to see, it's undoubtedly the case, we're going to see a massive influx, I think, of girls and women coming into the sport as a result of the World Cup this summer. There's no doubt about that. So it does have a knock-on effect. It's not automatic, and I agree with you that grassroots should be the priority. But I think you also do need to see investment at League of Ireland and at international level. You
referenced football being like the Cinderella of Irish sport, which is fair enough. I do think there are a lot of other sports in the country that maybe see themselves as the Cinderella of Irish sport. So how do you stop this becoming, I guess, to the detriment, this investment in football as being to the detriment of other sports who of course want a lot of money themselves? Yeah,
I think that's fair, and certainly we'll be addressing that in our motion, that it's not going to be a zero-sum game. We're not saying level down, in other words, reduce funding from everyone else. Far from it, as I say. And again, I think the FAI have been very clear, and I've talked to them about it in their strategic plan, that they're saying, overall sport funding in Ireland is too low. Let's bring it up more generally. Let's bring football up to the level of other sports like Gaelic and rugby. And certainly, I suppose there's been that historic disparity in treatment, because for so long GAA was the official national sport, if you like. The ban until 1971 for Gaelic players in playing Gaelic to play soccer. Football is seen as the garrison game traditionally, So there's a class and a sort of national issue here about the playing of football, and yet it has become become the biggest participation sport. It's hugely important across so many communities. Investment in football is about investing, in many cases, in bringing up the level of advantage in a community that might be disadvantaged, because traditionally it's been a working class game compared, for example, to rugby, always seen as a middle class game. So, these are the issues that in Labour we're interested in exploring in our motion, but it's not about investing in football at the expense of other sports, far from it. It's about trying to ensure we have a better sporting infrastructure across the country, because it's good for all of our health. And I speak as somebody who as a child hated team sport, never played team. I think I made it as a sub in the minor F netball team in my secondary school. But I happen to have sporty children, and it's so important to keep kids in sport, particularly teenage girls, that we have that investment, that we have that basic infrastructure, changing rooms, toilets, a valuing of women in sport. The difference it makes to go and see the women's team play in Tala is incredible. To see the crowds, to see the investment in Tala, and it's super to see the final stage of the stadium finished. It's a brilliant stadium, but to go and see teams playing in sort of substandard stadia, to see lack of facilities, that I think just demotivates children and adults from playing.
How do you convince people? So I know Ivana Bacik, I think, had put forward a proposal similar to this in June of 2021, or certainly a couple of years ago. These kind of ideas were being mooted, but for people who are sceptical maybe and say that obviously coming into election time, people, these are populist policies that everyone is going to agree with, but how do you then, I guess, promise to those people that these things are still going to be pushed for and promised after elections? Well,
look, I don't think anyone could accuse Aon of being a fair weather football fan, and I have to pay tribute to Aon O'Riordan. Clearly he's driving this. He, our sports spokesperson, Senator Mark Wall also. I mean, we have so many people in our parliamentary party who are absolutely passionate about football. I'm thinking of Michael D. Higgins, of course, our great president, who as a Labour TD, and indeed many years before he was a TD, was hugely involved in Galway United. At the night Michael D was elected in 2011, the Galway United team all came up to Dublin to celebrate with him. So, we have a long track record of support for football at grassroots, League of Ireland, and at international level. We're very serious about this. Aon produced a football manifesto for Labour in the 2020 general election. He tells me we were the only party to produce a manifesto on football. So we're coming to this with a long track record. We think the timing is right for the motion because of the FAI strategy and because of the World Cup performance. Obviously, it's a good time. But we are very hopeful, Shane, that we'll have cross-party support. And indeed, we're seeking a really positive response from government to this, because we do think now is the time for investment in football. The FAI has really, cleaned up its act, may I say, on governance. It's really impressive to see how they're investing now in girls and women's football in particular, and that's paying off. You see the incredible role models like Vera Pauw, like the great Abby Larkin, who I've had the pleasure of meeting. These women really need our support, and I think this is the time for us to be looking for cross-party support in the Dáil. And we had a briefing in the Dáil last week. We had Lisa Fallon in, we had others in, and we had TDs and senators from all parties there who were hugely supportive of the principles behind our motion. So this is not a populist gesture in any way, and I would hate people to think that. This is about trying to consolidate support for investment in the biggest participation sport in Ireland.
Do the GAA get too much of a share of the pie?
Well, look, I don't want to annoy any GAA fans, and I want to give a shout out to Ranelagh Gaels, who are the fantastic big local club in my own constituency, and again my kids have played with them. So there's huge grassroots investment and participation in Gaelic, and it's fantastic to see. But again, it's not a zero-sum game. Loads of the kids who play Gaelic during the week are playing soccer at weekends and vice versa. So I think it brings every sport up when you see participation. Again, I see it with my own kids, speaking of somebody who wasn't a sporty kid, that if you're involved in a sport, you're going to be involved in more sports. You're going to have an interest in sport. And most Gaelic fans I know are also watching football, often British Premier League football too. So I think, yes, traditionally Gaelic was of course the favoured sport. That was the national policy, until relatively recently. But I think now we're seeing a recognition that you can play, of course you should and can play both types of sport. You can also have an interest in rugby and another, even in cricket. We're seeing cricket taking on a new new fan base in Ireland as well. So I think investment in sport grows, in a sport tends to grow support for sports and participation in sport.
Could you do anything municipally with the because I know Jerry McEnany, when he was talking about this, the FAI president did talk about it not just being one code, I think he referenced, or not just one sport either. Is there some way that this could be harnessed in a way that, because like I see every community sees it, where you have amazing facilities in one sport in this area, and there's absolutely, when communities are working together, those facilities are used for all sports, but that's not coming from the top down.
Yeah, that tends to be a more organic thing, and I've talked to Jerry about this. He and I share a Cork background. I spent some years living in Cork as a child, so I think that's right. I think it's more, we have to develop a system where we are sharing sports facilities, and again, in the FAI plan talks about trying to do that when you're doing when you're investing at international level in training, that we should have a national football training centre, like that could be a shared campus. Of course it should. And Abbottstown, that was the great ambition, of course, and I think there's some scepticism, I suppose, among many of us about the big ticket items, and I think that dates back to the days of the Bertie Bowl and so on, and there's a little so I think there is a bit of, unfortunately, we've become sceptical about investment in big sports facilities, and yet when you go to Tallaght, when you see the investment there, and I'm old enough to remember the development of what I'm still calling the Lansdowne Stadium, so it does make a big difference. People, and Croke Park, of course, is a super facility, so it does make a difference, makes people feel much better about the sport, and I think it does encourage participation to see investment at that level too. It's, while again, the grassroots has to be prioritised.
One last one for me, just because you have mentioned a lot about equality and the equity of access to facilities, and in a week or a couple of weeks where we spent an awful lot of time as a nation discussing how the taxpayers' dollar is getting spent. Yes. The GAA, I think, get 20 million or thereabouts in state funding a year, and I ask specifically in relation to the conversation that's come up, the threatened action from the LGFA players, camogie players, around the lack of not getting enough money for expenses and the various actions that they're taking. And there's obviously an ongoing conversation in relation to the integration of the various organisations. Like, there's a very easy step here with taxpayers' money that the GAA could preempt all of those conversations about the integration and step in and do something about this in the short. Like, it's not a situation that's tenable, and I wonder if there's a way with taxpayers' money that's already been spent on the GAA specifically, that the government or that somebody can step in and say, can we preempt all of that stuff? It's very difficult to make a case against doing it. It's just figuring out a way to do it. But I'm just conscious, because you did speak a lot about that equality piece. This is a real live conversation, and it feels like there have been sort of, players have been left out to look after themselves here. Yeah,
what we're seeing with the LGFA is very, very similar to what happened with women's football some years ago. As I referenced the strike and the PFAI support for that, which was really important in getting pay equity there. But we're seeing, I think, across all sports, women seeking and fighting for equality with men, and I think it's hugely positive to see that. I do think the GAA should respond, and I think they will, very positively to it. But I agree with you. I think. Do
you think they should step in and find a way? They've just had a bonus round of preliminary quarterfinals that would have delivered millions. They're going to have another bumper weekend at Croke Park this weekend. There is a way to make a small gesture that would mean a lot in the meantime. Do you think they should do that?
Yes, I do. Yes, absolutely. And I do. In our motion, we're going to. I think they should anyway. But I also think in our motion, which we're finalising the drafting of, we're going to be referencing how you ensure gender equality across board. Are there mechanisms from the state side, from the government side, around funding, stipulations on funding, for example, that could be used in that way? But I do think the GAA should step up anyway. And I think it's been very positive to see the FAI and see pay equity there. It's hugely important. But again, it's also about it's not necessarily about the stick as well. It's about the carrot. It's about ensuring that there's capacity in organisations to bring forward new players and young players, and investment in diversity generally. I mean, I wanted to give a shout out to David Rake, who's been works with the FAI and brings forward girls football at school level, and that you know, to have an individual working on the ground bringing forward, he helped us hugely. We set up a club, Inchicore Girls as it was, and now merged with Larkview FC in Kimmage. But you know, we got huge help from him particularly, and from the FAI in starting up a girls club years ago. And it's that kind of stuff that keeps people involved and you know, and supports giving parents like me a chance to do coaching courses. You know, that's the kind of stuff that really helps, as well as ensuring pay equity for women playing at a higher level. But it's about, you know, ensuring parents and particularly girls and children feel supported. And you know, I think across all sports that's really important.
Well, I think, like we talked about the Women's World Cup, in terms of optics, I think what's going on with the camogie players and the LGFA players at the minute is embarrassing to us as a nation. I think people of influence need to call that out, and we need to do more to quickly solve it. It's an embarrassment.
Yeah, so, and the GAA do need to step up. I think you're right about that.
All right, well look, we're going to watch this space. We've also reached out to the Minister for Sport, Thomas Byrne, to come onto the show and lay out the government's plans, I guess, to get a response to
that would be great. Let's hope we can. Let's hope you hear from him soon
to go on. Ivana Bacik, thanks a million for coming in. Hopefully the first of many, and we'll watch this with progress over the next few weeks and beyond. So thanks a lot for coming in.
I'd be delighted to come back. Thank you for inviting me.